everybody. Welcome back to Talk with TQ and the Energy Stoners Cafe. Today we have a guest that is very engaged in good health and wellness. His name is Cedrick Batchateu. You'll remember him from a previous show where he talked about his great book called 7 Steps to Prevent Chronic Disease. Tonight, we're going to discuss one of the steps, and it's all about inflammation. So many people out there, including myself, didn't know that we have inflammation, and that's a factor in chronic disease. So Cedrick, thank you for coming back, and talk to me and the audience about why inflammation is important and why we have inflammation and how we can actually recognize it.
Thank you for having me, Toni, and it's a pleasure to be back here on your show.
Pleasure's mine.
When it comes to health and wellness, I believe one of the most important aspects that we can address in order to alleviate a lot of the problems that we have is inflammation. But first, I want to define to your audience what inflammation is. Inflammation is one of the ways in which the body protects itself. This is how the body protects itself from toxins, from viruses, from foreign and often harmful substances that cause trouble within us. And so inflammation is actually a defense mechanism that the body employs to keep you safe and healthy. The issue at hand is when inflammation becomes chronic, it becomes long-term. It leads to chronic diseases. Research has shown us that much. And what happens is the inflammatory response, which is meant to be a measured response towards a pathogen or an infection or some sort of viral pathogen in the body, is left on for a significant period of time. So what is meant to mobilize your cells to fight off this thing is left on. And so over time, it not only looks for and fights off the viruses, but it starts to damage even your cells. Now, one of the challenges with inflammation is identifying it. And so one of the ways in which I recommend anybody does is when you go and you speak to your physician, one of the things you can do is ask for what's called a C-reactive protein test. And what this does is C-reactive protein is a molecule that actually indicates the presence of inflammation, an infection, or a chronic disease. So that's one of the things that people can do. It's one of the conversations people can have with their physicians when they go in for their annual checkups.
So you use the letter C, reactive protein.
That's right.
So is there an A and a B?
No. C-reactive protein, it's just its scientific name. It's the one compound that we know that we can measure, and its elevated presence or elevated levels within your body is a sure sign that there is some sort of inflammatory response going on in your body. So it's the tool or the level that we measure to tell if you have an inflammatory response or some sort of infection going on.
It almost sounds like the body attacks itself.
It can. And so again, with inflammation, what we're talking about is a measured response to an ongoing pathogenic infection of sorts. The issue at hand is when it becomes chronic or long-term. And so sometimes it can actually turn against the body and begin to attack things and damage things, because the inflammatory response, one of the ways in which it affects your body is that your vessels become permeable. And so that permeability, essentially, it means it opens up in order to allow for certain molecules and antibodies, such as white blood cells, to be able to travel quickly to get to the site of damage or the site of action. And so you're looking at organs being affected, you're looking at your vessels being affected just in order to fight off whatever is going on. Now, after a while, unfortunately, it starts to, it can lead to damaging of your tissues, damaging of your cells if it's left on for a very long time.
That's important because most people do not understand the significance of inflammation. I know that, you understand if you have an inflammation, if you see swelling. So it kind of manifests often as a form of swelling of some sort.
Pain as well, yes.
And pain.
And redness.
And redness.
Yes.
But it's actually a defense mechanism.
It is a defense mechanism. Whenever you see a part of your body, for example, that has swollen and has red, it has a lot of inflammatory markers or
Mm-hmm.
inflammatory cytokines that have
Mm-hmm.
been released in the area.
Mm-hmm.
And so that pain that you're feeling is really, these are your warriors. These are your white blood
Yeah.
cells. They're fighting.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why it's so sensitive to the touch. That's why it's swollen.
Yeah.
Because there's actually a battle going on in that part of your body. But what we're saying is that there's also a marker that we can test, that your physician can test, that can tell you whether there is inflammation going on when you're not visibly showing any sort of swelling or redness along your body. And so this test is the C-reactive protein, which is a marker indicating inflammation going on internally. It may be affecting one of your organs, it may be affecting a particular part of your body, but that is how we can actually identify whether we have a high level of inflammation going on that is not evidently visible to the naked eye.
Does inflammation play a part in chronic diseases such as diabetes, high blood pressure?
Great question, Tony. I'm glad you asked that. Research actually links the level of inflammation in your body to these chronic diseases. In fact, research links an elevated level of inflammation or a high level of C-reactive protein to chronic diseases such as diabetes, such as heart disease, such as elevated cholesterol or dyslipidemia, such as arthritis, of course. So all of these chronic diseases stem from inflammation. In fact, this is why the first step in our self-care advocate protocol is reducing inflammation, because we understand that inflammation plays a role in probably 95% of the chronic diseases that we as people, as Americans, are facing each and every day. So when you can turn off the sources of inflammation, if you can address those sources, you're well on your way to healing your body and recovering.
So thinking about self-advocacy, it's like something you can do on your own. You don't have to see a doctor to do certain things, maybe to change certain habits, such as I've heard a lot, and maybe the audience has heard a lot about sugar being very dangerous to the system. I'm talking raw sugar. I mean, everything becomes sugar, but when you put a couple teaspoons in your tea, coffee, if you're eating sweets all the time, I mean, the inflammation that you see is weight gain. Is that inflammation?
Well, it's an excellent question about the link between sugar and inflammation. So I want to say this. In my book, I talk about the 6 plagues of the modern diet. And one of the biggest plagues among the 6 plagues is sugar, right? Processed sugar or refined sugar, whatever you want to call it. Now, sugar, I want to put things into perspective. Sugar is a good thing. Okay, sugar is a source of energy for the human body. It's like putting fuel in your car. The challenge is, how much sugar do you need? Well, according to the American Heart Association, the average adult male should get no more than 35 grams of sugar a day.
So
35 grams of sugar.
So how does that look?
So it's about 9 teaspoonful, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
So, but if you keep that number in mind, 35 grams of sugar a day, but likewise, the average adult the average adult in America consumes about 77 grams of sugar. So
a day.
A day. So if you think about it, the average adult male is eating twice as much sugar as he is supposed to consume. Now, for the average adult woman, she's supposed to consume 25 grams of sugar a day. So she is eating on average 3 times the amount of sugar that she's supposed to consume. Now, again, sugar is a good thing because it's a source of energy. It's actually our main source of energy. So sugar is meant to be like fuel. It's meant to be used. It's meant to be burnt up, right? So if you're going to consume sugar, well, you need to get out there and run. You need to get out there and do some sort of exercise or physical activity. If you combine the excess intake of sugar that the average American eats with a sedentary lifestyle, boy, you've got a recipe for disaster. First of which is obesity, right? Because sugar is then unused energy will be stored as fat, okay? And then, of course, sugar also plays a role in diabetes, right? Because diabetes is the body's way of mishandling or mismanaging blood sugar. right? So you have all these things, and of course, it ties into heart disease and it affects your lipid cholesterol panel. So sugar, or rather excess sugar, definitely leads to inflammation, which causes all sorts of chronic condition.
What kind of sugar is ideal for people to have? Because many times people just have a sweet tooth. I know in some families they say, oh, we all have a sweet tooth. We love sweets, you know, grandmother made the best cakes and we all have a sweet tooth and we're all a little overweight or we're all obese.
So as far as what kind of sugar we have to consume, so again, I want to be clear, table sugar is, or rather cane sugar, gets processed into the white table sugar, okay?
Yes.
And so because regular sugar or unprocessed sugar tends to be brown, right?
Yes.
It has that extra molasses and it has somewhat more health benefits than the white stuff or the white table sugar.
Right.
Now, the thing we have to understand about sugar, again, when consumed in moderation, you're fine. But when consumed in excess, issues arise. One of the qualities that sugar has that makes it so dangerous is the fact that it's a very addictive substance.
Yeah.
And it works by rewarding the brain pathways and the pleasure pathways in your brain. What that simply means is if you and I consume something that is full of sugar, okay, our brain wants it. And so a lot of people are addicted to sugar. They've actually done studies where they've looked at people's brains and how it reacts when exposed to sugar. My goodness, the brain lights up when it's exposed to sugar. So sugar is a very addicting substance. And so as far as what type of sugar, now, I would say plain sugar is fine, again, but you have to consume it in moderation. Now, there's a litany of different type of alternative sugars. You know, you have a 0-calorie sweeteners, you have Splenda, you have stevia, you have aspartame, you have all these different things that are available in the market. And unfortunately, I happen to believe that many of those give people false hope. And what I mean by false hope is this, you know, take aspartame, for example. Recently, a report came out by the World Health Organization saying that aspartame may be linked to certain types of, it may be carcinogenic. And then the FDA came out and said, well, you know, it's class 2B carcinogen, which means it can contribute, but it's not really carcinogenic. So there's a lot of back and forth going on between the two. But hey, that's not good news for you and me, right?
Yeah.
So it's almost like I would almost rather you give me plain sugar rather than giving me something that is marketed as a healthier alternative. But then it turns out it may possibly increase the chances of me developing some type of cancer. So again, with alternative sugars, one of the things that I recommend is stevia. Stevia is something that is commonly encouraged within the diabetic community. One of the reasons is because it is a 0-calorie sweetener, but its advantage is that it is a plant-based substance. It's not necessarily one of these chemical additives that are often marketed out there. So if I were to suggest something that was maybe healthier than your typical table sugar, I would recommend stevia.
Stevia.
Yes.
Stevia. You know, I know that in recent years, they've started changing the packets. When you order a tea or coffee, they bring out that thing and it's got like sugar, sweet and low with the pink. And now it's got the yellow and the blue, you know, and every now and then you'll go to a restaurant and have the green one, and that's stevia. But I've heard that it's more expensive. I know that it's more expensive. So often the waiter or the waitress will carry them in their pocket and just like give it to you if you ask. But it's very hard to find. And I think also, you tell me what you think of this. I've found that if you tell, in my world, if you tell somebody that something is healthy or even whole grain, then their mind automatically says it tastes bad. So, you know, when I would cook for people, you know, I would do a healthy recipe because I think it's a responsible thing to do when you're preparing food for others as well as yourself. But often I'll do something very healthy and I know it tastes great, but I won't tell anybody that it was whole wheat flour, or I won't tell anybody that there's no sugar in this, that I use something that has no sugar in it. Like there's another one called agave. You've heard of that?
Yes, yes.
That tastes exactly like sugar. very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So how can someone address the expense of trying to go sugar-free? Maybe you have to tough it out or change your palate?
Well, that's a great question. How does someone, make the changes considering that they're not necessarily subsidized by the government? So,
Yeah.
political action is probably one of the best things you can do as
Oh,
far as getting the government, because the government subsidizes a lot of foods. Unfortunately, the government subsidizes a lot of foods that are not necessarily the best for you. So, one of the
yeah.
first steps that we can do is get the government to shift its focus from some of the cheaper ingredients to some of the more wholesome ingredients, right? If you
Hmm.
can find a way to help increase production, thereby bringing the price down, that would definitely help. But ultimately, being a self care advocate is about making those sacrifices. It's about saying that this is what I need to do for myself. One of the great parables or examples that I've heard in the past is if you offered someone $20 million, but the caveat would be that they would not wake up tomorrow, what good would the $20 million be, right? So the point of that story, or the point of that little example, is to say that, listen, good health is worth more than anything. And so, as a self care advocate, I would hope that you would begin to invest in yourself. And what that may mean that choosing, avocado oil instead of canola oil, right? Choosing coconut oil instead of safflower oil. They tend to be a little bit more expensive than the vegetable oils, but ultimately they do far more good for you. As opposed to what vegetable oils and canola oil and seed oils do to the body. So it's about saying that I understand the risk of using this and I understand the benefits of using the more whole foods products, but I'm willing to invest in my health because that's the only thing that's going to carry me forward tomorrow.
Well, certainly it's less expensive than getting sick with cancer or
Yes,
diabetes.
yes.
That can be very expensive,
Oh, yeah. Oh,
in
yeah.
many ways, not just monetary. It's interesting that you say invest in oneself. A lot of people don't really understand what that really means unless they're going to buy new shoes or something like that.
Hmm.
So what would be like the first investment that you would advise people to make in themselves?
Well, that's a very good question as far as investing in themselves. Well, one of the simplest changes that you can make, and I want to go to the aspect of oils.
Hmm.
One of the first changes I would encourage anybody who's watching or who's listening to make is to go inside their kitchen cabinet or their kitchen pantry, open up your cooking oil, and get rid of any sort of vegetable oil. I know canola is a popular one.
Soy.
Soybean oil, safflower oil, anything, rapeseed oil. Get rid of anything that comes from a vegetable. What you want to do is you want to use coconut oil, butter, ghee, animal fat like duck fat and lard.
Wow.
Yeah,
Lard.
yeah. You
Lard.
want to
Come
yes,
on.
believe it or not,
Really?
you want to use those types of palm oil is another one, avocado
Oh.
oil. Those are actually much better for you. In fact, the research shows that the Western diet is supposed to have an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of 1 to 1. Ideally, that's what you're supposed to have a great cardiovascular profile.
Hmm.
But the sad reality is in the Western world, in the American diet, right, the standard American diet, our omega-6 to 3 ratio is closer to 20 to 1. Now, that leads to very many complications. One of the biggest complications it leads to is heart disease and heart attacks, of course. And so why is that? Because we've gone from eating whole fats and healthy fats to demonizing them in exchange for these vegetable oils. Now, what makes vegetable oil so harmful to human health is, number one, how they're made. They're often made under extreme heat, which denatures the protein and the lipid profile of them. Then they're often deodorized, right? And chemicals are used to extract them from the seed or canola or soy or whatever it's derived from. Then they're deodorized because the smell is just rancid. It's horrible.
Yeah.
And then they're left exposed to the light. One thing, if you've ever shopped for, let's say olive oil, for example,
Hmm.
maybe you've noticed olive oil tends to be in a darkened bottle, Have you noticed that?
Yes, I have.
It tends to be in a darkened bottle. And there's a reason for that, because one of the things that happens is when that oil is exposed to light, whether it's light from the sun or light from the grocery store lighting system, that light actually interacts with the oil, okay, with the compounds in the oil, and it oxidizes those compounds. And so when you and I cook with it and eat it and consume foods that have been cooked in oxidized oil, guess what? The research shows it increases our risk for diabetes, heart disease, cancer, obesity, you name it. Almost all of these chronic diseases have been linked to oxidized or vegetable oils. Whereas when you have something, an oil that is ideally in a dark brown bottle, right? It actually protects the oil molecules, usually olive oil. It protects them from the sun, from the light. All right. It protects it from oxidation. And so you and I are able to consume oil in its original lipid profile without there being any sort of oxidation being added inside of our bodies. And so that's one of the simplest changes anybody can make. Go into your kitchen pantries, look at what type of oil you've been cooking with,
Yeah.
and if it's a vegetable oil or a seed oil, please do yourself a favor. Get rid of that and focus on getting healthy fats. So plain butter. So I can't believe it's not butter. No, get rid of that.
That's fake.
Plain butter.
That's
exactly.
fake butter.
They're full of vegetable oils and they're full of oxidizing agents. So I would stay away from those things.
I've noticed in the grocery store that often you'll see olive oil in cans. Now, most people, I don't know what most people think, but I used to think that anything in a can is like a little iffy. But now that you're telling me about the light and the oxidation, maybe that's a good way to go.
Great point. Maybe that is. I'm not familiar with olive oil in cans, just because that's not what we normally get. We normally get the bottle, the ones in the bottom, the brown bottle.
Yeah.
But here's a trick that I would encourage anybody to use. Whenever you use olive oil, whenever you purchase olive oil or coconut oil or any avocado oil or palm oil or any of the healthier options that I've suggested, one of the things I would encourage anybody to do is to turn to the back and find out where it was made. The trick is this. You want to buy oil, healthy oil that has been made or that was produced in one location. So made in Italy or made in California.
Spain.
Or Spain. What you want to be careful of is if it says contains products from Spain, California, Italy, multiple locations, only because usually, when they combine these oils, it's really not good because there's been time that's taken place and it just feels cheap. But I would always encourage anybody, if you're going to buy healthier oil, make sure it comes from one location and avoid anything, even if it's olive oil, avoid it if it comes from multiple locations. Stick with one location and I think you'll be fine.
What about olives?
Well, olives contain olive oil. Okay. And so olives are going to be good for you because, again, the lipid profile, the omega profile of a lot of the fatty acid profile of that's within that oil, you're getting it in its purest, rawest form. It hasn't been extracted. It hasn't been denatured in any way. So when you're eating the olive, essentially, you're getting everything, including the other antioxidants that are found within the olive. Whereas olive oil, the way they're usually extracted is a method called expeller pressed, right? So they don't use as much heat. It uses, a lot of times it uses pressure to squeeze the oil out of the olive or out of, the avocado or whatever you have it. And so by doing that, you're able to get a fatty acid profile that is healthy. It hasn't been tampered with. It hasn't been modified by the addition of extra chemicals. And so you're getting something. It's like eating a whole avocado. You're getting the olive oil that would normally be in the avocado. And you're getting it in its fullest form. So I would strongly encourage you to eat olives. I think it's one of the healthier things you can do.
So you're saying that it's not heated. I know that sometimes heating an oil can make it carcinogenic. I know that's true of canola oil. So when you see on the label cold pressed, that's what you really want.
Well, yes. And so heating, what it does is it actually denatures the fatty acid profile. So you think of anything when exposed to heat, no matter what it is, it starts to lose its structure. It starts to lose its health profiles. Now, of course, different types of oils have different heating points. Okay, so it doesn't mean that if it's just because you cooked it or fried it in that oil, it's all of a sudden bad. No, for some of these oils, you have to like leave it on for a very long time before, you have a denatured, fatty acid profile that you're ingesting. But generally speaking, they have a high boiling, melting point. And so you're able to consume the product that you cooked in olive oil, and it's fine. It's actually very good for you because you're getting a lot of the benefits of the fatty acid profile.
It probably explains why certain people in like Italy and in the Mediterranean, they tend to have a longer life than we do, because the Italians, consume, they say that they consume a lot of olive oil. They must know this.
Well, yeah, I think that, I believe there are areas around the world called blue zones. And these are areas where people tend to have a longevity, a long life. They live a very long time with usually very few diseases, at least compared to, here in America today, 6 out of 10 adults have a chronic disease, right? And so that's epidemic is growing worse by the day. So I think when you study the diets of people living in those types of areas called blue zones, the Mediterranean comes up as one. Another interesting thing is that a lot of these cultures, they eat a lot of beans. And that's another thing that you can do. You can add to your diet to actually help your body and help reduce inflammation. Beans have a lot of fiber. They come with a lot of fiber, and so which is great for your system, your digestive tract, your digestive system. It's great to keeping you regular, right? It's great with for your blood sugar, right? Because fiber helps slow down the absorption of sugar in the blood, thereby causing less damage with spikes and insulin release. So there are certain things that there are many things we can learn from these cultures, these societies, and I think eating olive oil in its purest form, right? Especially ideally extra virgin olive oil, consuming things like that, adding that in our diet while removing, sort of the vegetable seed oils from our diet, I think it's going to add to our living a longer life.
I find it's very satisfying too.
Yes.
As you go to an Italian restaurant and they have the dreaded bread, that you dip it in the olive oil and it's kind of addictive. But we're not at a restaurant right now, because I would be dipping if we were. But this was really good. You gave such great information. I don't know how you keep all that stuff packed in your brain, but, I appreciate that. And I know that my audience does too. Thank you, Cedrick. This was a great show. I definitely am going to have you back like really soon, and to talk more about everything. And I thank the audience for coming to the show and listening to the Energy Stoners Cafe and visiting Talk with TQ. Please send your comments. I love to hear your comments, and to have a really great day, and be well. Bye-bye.